What's up? Alrighty. I thought there was a way to do some type of where is it at? Where's the copper? Mm-hmm. Oh, that was something good. So what's up, y'all? Go ahead and start this up. If you don't know what the title's about, read in the description because that's what I'm gonna be talking about right now. Because I thought this was really interesting about this book that was written by a rabbi. Now, I've been saying in some of my videos that there's a lot of metaphor and personifying inside of the Bible, like personas and stuff like that for the characters and the names. But this book right here that guy wrote, The Return of the Kosher Pig, was actually written about Jesus. Now, in some of my previous videos, I talked about the name of Jesus and what does it actually means. Because we believe that the word or the name Yeshua is actually the name for Jesus in Hebrew. But this book right here, written by a rabbi now, actually proves that it's not. And if you can, take the time to read this because it gives you a little bit of insight on what I'll be talking about when I'm talking about, this person that they call Jesus. Now, this is just, speculation on my behalf because this is my meaning. It's not something that's written in stone. But this book right here gives an inclination to what I'm talking about. So, let's dive into it, y'all. It's back. It's going to be a good 35 minutes of conversation right here. So check it out. This rabbi wrote a book about Jesus and his works and the claims that was made against him by the Pharisees or by his own people. And it talks about what it represents for everybody to know who Jesus is. And it goes back and it talks about kosher. Now, in his words, he states, I'm just paraphrasing here, that Jesus is the kosher. And the reason why that's important is because the name Jesus in Hebrew isn't Yeshua. It's Yeshu. And Yeshu can be spelled two different ways. Y-E-S-U or Y-E-S-H-U. And that doesn't mean Yeshua. Yeshua is totally different from Yeshu. But we've been taught that that's the name. Well, as you read through this guy's book, it talks about the importance of kosher practices and similar effects, and why Jesus was considered a kosher, and how the laws of the Talmud weren't changed. They were just, re-articulated by Jesus and his disciples. So my conclusion is that this story right here tells us in better detail of what Jesus might be in this story. Not saying that it's the person and not saying that the things in the story weren't real, but just saying that people were given this story and the metaphors of the story as actual events. So not by any means am I telling anybody to drop their religion or anything, but I think it's an interesting read because after all, the King James Bible was translated from Hebrew to English. And the New Testament was translated from Greek to English. So it was sort of similar, the time that they wrote this stuff. Now, this guy, the rabbi, goes in and talks about who was considered the kosher, or who was considered the kosher pig. Jesus' name comes up, but it comes up as the name of Yeshu. Now, I pointed out that this word Yeshu, spelled Y-E-S-U, actually is a two-syllable word. The first syllable is ye, and the second syllable is su. All right, now if you break those down, you'll find out that those words actually, mean something separately. Ye would mean thou or the, and su would mean sow or swine. Now, for a while there, people were saying that I'm reaching, but when I found this online and the reference to it, that it was an actual book that was put out by a rabbi, that right there was like, wow, that really, gives me, confidence that I was on the right track. Now, I'm not saying that all the stories about Jesus was talking about the same thing, because throughout my studies, and I do mean studies, and research, I found that the Bible and a lot of these religious texts are broken up into subjects. Like when you go to high school, you have math, English, science, and electives and stuff like that. The same thing occurs in the Bible. And we're not taught like that. We're taught to read it word for word and take the word for what it means. But you can't do that when you have translation, meaning that when you translate something from another language to your language, if you don't have context, you're just putting words on paper. And the average person that comes up and reads this stuff will have no idea what the context is of the passage or of the information that they're reading. They'll just be reading the words, sort of like the nursery rhymes that we learned when we were a kid. Like Humpty Dumpty. For a long time there, I didn't know that Humpty Dumpty was actually a story about an old English king who was a heavyset guy who died from a head injury. And it talked about how he sat on the crown and all that stuff like that. So if you look into Humpty Dumpty, you'll find out that it was talking about a king. Also, the Three Little Pigs was talking about, certain type of respiratory diseases. Jack and Jill was talking about, struggling and toiling out in the fields and stuff like that, like farming. So these different stories taught to us without context we don't have any understanding of them. So my whole deal was just to find out what the understanding was. It's a good idea because these things pass on valuable information. The Bible passes on valuable information in philosophy, science, medicine, farming, animal husbandry, all of that stuff that if the person had to start over from scratch without technology would be able to survive and flourish. It even talks about technology too when you get to the New Testament along the lines of Revelations, where we misconstrued the story about the beast and the mark of the beast and the end of civilization. Because see, we read from left to right, and the translation was written from left to right, but in actuality, it was supposed to be interpreted from right to left. That means the true origin, but the true method of reading the Bible isn't from Genesis to Revelations. It's actually from Revelations to Genesis. Because if you know about how the rabbis inside of the synagogues read the Torah, it's on a scroll. So the entire Torah is on one big scroll. And they start reading it from the right end, and end on the left end. And see, that means that they start at the end of the Old Testament and work their way back to the beginning. Now, why is that significant? Because if you read it from the end to the beginning, you would get a totally different meaning than what you got if you read from the beginning to the end. And that's why it's so important for us to know the methods in which these things were interpreted. So, if you're talking about mass producing literature about science, it's going to be written in many different languages, and it's going to be compressed and put into some type of medium that we're able to digest and understand on a simple term or on a layman's terms. But it was up to the teachers or the references, which is the 3 books of the Bible that was supposed to be administered or disseminated out to the people at the same time, because they didn't put those books out. For instance, the books were the Catholicon, the Apocrypha, and the Bible. Those were the 3 books that were put out for you to study the scriptures, and it would give you context in what you're reading. So let's fast forward to the New Testament, because that was the one that was added in later on from the old translation of the Torah. And it talks about Jesus, who was described in the Torah as being Yeshu. Now, this gentleman that wrote this book, The Kosher Pig, on his website, it starts off saying Yeshua, the kosher pig. And see, the reason why this is important is because it gives a depiction of who the character was metaphorically told, the story was told about. See, because kosher practices is a big thing in Judaism. Kosher is talking about the different types of animals that you can eat that are clean and stuff like that. It also talks about prep work, on how to prepare the animals and stuff. Who's responsible for the preparation? Who receives the prepped items? And then what's done with the items after their purpose is served, i.e., the sacrifice for forgiveness or whatever. Okay? So when you look at this, you're learning about a practice that's been done for these people since the dawn of time, which I think was done actually by all people. That's why it's so important to put this information out and disseminate it to all masses, to everybody on the earth. So let's jump right into it about who Yeshua is. And in my interpretation, the pig was created after mass famines and the lack of ability to hunt large ground animals. For instance, like the buffalo, the caribou, and all that stuff. So in those days, they had to devise methods on how they were going to satisfy large numbers of people when their stores, their food stores, are low. And it even talks about that also as well in the Bible. So what they did was they got into the process, they started a program or a process of domesticating animals, starting off with small animals at first. So the animals that they targeted or concentrated on were the bovids or the bovines, or what we call today the cows. But in actuality, these are animals of 4-legged land animals of all species, from the goat to the horse, to the cow, to the buffalo, the caribou, and even the llama and the camel. So these animals were domesticated for our use as either, laborers or sustenance. And this is why the story is so important, because it teaches us how to keep these animals in a safe and healthy environment. That way they can be utilized by us for either food or for labor. Now, why was the pig so admired in those days? Because in those days, the pig was not an everyday animal like it is today. There were no wild pigs in nature. These animals were brought about in order to satisfy a serious need in famines. Now, it's because the pigs can reproduce in short periods of time in great numbers and become harvesting size in a short period of time. And just as long as these animals were considered, or kept in a clean environment. And see, the Bible talks about that too as well. Same as the other religious texts. Some religions don't look at the cow as, an animal that could be sacrificed or eaten. And they actually did turn these animals into deities and stuff like that. That's because they were created and they were served or they were used to serve and save large numbers of people in a time of famine. Like if there's no fresh game around, because these herds, they move for large distances in short periods of time. And sometimes these animals will go incognito on our butts and we won't see them for months, sometimes years. And there could be thousands of them. See, because I'm a firm believer in that these animals, all animals, outnumber humans at least 20 to 1, and that their ability to go unnoticed for long periods of time is a skill that they developed over time because of mankind. Because we hunted them and utilized them for our needs. So these animals developed a technique that allowed them to stay out of sight. You can't even find their dead bodies when they die, and we contribute that to them being consumed by other animals. But in actuality, animals actually consider this a reverence. When they get sick, they'll walk off and they'll hide themselves so their bodies can't be tampered with while they're going through the transition phase. So, even though you don't see large numbers of animals around your environment, don't mean they're not actually there. I mean, these animals have developed the ability to hide in plain sight when we've become public on all aspects of our lives. So let's get back to the Yeshu, the kosher pig. Now, that title right there isn't actually on the book. The title on the book is called The Kosher Pig, and it's by that rabbi that I put into the description. So if you're interested in reading it and want to find out more, check it out, because these guys go into detail on what this actually means and who they could be talking about. Now, the inclination I got from this is that the story about Jesus in the beginning was talking about creating this kosher animal. I mean, because it doesn't make sense for a somewhat prominent, Jewish couple to have to deliver their baby inside of a barn. Now, we've been taught over the years that the manger was the setting for Jesus, and they made it look all nice with hay and a little crib and baby Jesus laying in there on top of hay. But if any of you guys have ever worked around farm animals and worked around housing these farm animals, you're not going to see that in reality. If you go inside of a manger, aka a barn, where they house animals like cows, horses, goats, and pigs, you're going to find that these animals shit, piss, and eat all in the same place and sleep all in the same place, even on top of their defecation and urination. So there's no reason why the story should have took place like that. out of all the places, in Nazareth, that the person could have stayed and had their baby, they chose to tell the story of them having a baby in a barn amongst all the animals and the filth. And then the men that came were the 3 wise men. They could have been just the 3 religious men or anything, 3. You know what I'm saying? But they said that they were wise. And they came bearing gifts. Now these gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, are very important gifts because these gifts aren't what you consider valuable. These are considered gifts that you can get from nature. For instance, the gold, of course, they didn't go into too much detail, but in those time frames, they talked about a substance that was considered more valuable than gold and even resembled gold. And that was the oil of the olive or the olive tree. Olive oil was considered liquid gold in those times. So the 3 things that were brought as gifts by these 3 wise men were actually oils. Not just any oils, but oils of sanitation or oils of cleanliness. Frankincense, myrrh, and gold or olive oil are all antibacterial oils. Now, what was the purpose of bringing 3 antibacterial or antimicrobial oils to a child that was just born? And if you think about it, you would come to one conclusion: for cleanliness. Now, why is it important? Because if you don't clean, then you will collect bacteria and germs and develop illnesses. So, this child that was born received 3 gifts: olive oil, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, if you're just listening to this, you're just coming in and you're just hearing this, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. So I advise, if you're coming in, check out the description and go and check out this website in that book that this rabbi wrote about, because it gives you a good idea of what I'm leading up into. That this part of the story, the nativity, was actually an origin story for the domestication of Yeshu. Now, if you look, the way I found this out, because I didn't know that that was a 2-syllable words. What I realized is that in Hebrew, they break words up into 2 syllables and they separate them with some type of punctuation or something like that. So that means that in English, this is a 2-syllable word, like cannot, and we turn it into one word with the comma as the punctuation, the apostrophe T, my bad. And that word becomes 1. It becomes can't. But in actuality, it's 2 words, cannot. The same thing applies to this word, Yeshu. Because if you look it up in Hebrew, it's separated by the Y-E and the S-H-U or the S-U. So that means that it's 2 words. So when you look in these words up in etymology, you'll find out that ye means the or thee or thou, and su or su means the sow or the swine. Now, I'm not trying to disrespect nobody, but that's too much of a coincidence. And then to have this story being told about the kosher pig, and it's not a new thing, it's something that they talked about a long time, throughout the religions. So to find this and to realize what I was reading in the first place, it became so obvious of what they're talking about, at least to me, but not to other people unless they have an open mind and can see what I'm talking about. But in all other words, the story was talking about creating a domesticated animal on which will save countless numbers of people, which will save the world. Because at that time, you could die easily if you ran out of food. Because a famine is something that affects everyone. Because if there's no food to buy, it don't matter how much money you got. You're not going to buy your way up out of that. So these animals were bred. Now later on, I'm going to tell you guys on which two animals were bred to create Yeshu. And this is going to give you an idea, because believe me, I don't believe in coincidences. And this seems like a large coincidence that they would name this person, Yeshu, after some type of land-based animal. Now, when you look at it, and they go into detail and tell you about how important kosher was, and that famines were a common thing at that age, you'll realize that the most important thing you needed to be saved from was starvation. And starvation is hell. I don't know about you guys, but if you're starving, man, that's painful as hell. And I just imagine if you die from malnutrition or starvation, how painful that is. That's literally a living hell, where your insides are just continuously aching all the way up into the point where you just die. So, the savior of mankind, or the savior of all life, or human life on this planet, or on this earth, was saved by the ability to provide food for large numbers of people. So, in other words, Yeshu was the salvation of mankind. And this rabbi here, let me see if I can find his name. This rabbi, Sharpira, was the rabbi that wrote this story called the Kosher Pig. But before, it used to be called Yeshu, the Kosher Pig. But you know how they do remakes and, republishing things and stuff like that. I don't think this is a coincidence, guys. And I hope people look into this, because they will get a good idea. I don't think this is a deal breaker on religion. I think what this is an opportunity for people to get a better understanding of the meaning of the information that they're receiving. Because a lot of people don't understand that in life you don't really have too many chances to make mistakes. So you should actually be aware of it. And let me check the chat real quick, because I'm almost done with this. So, salutes, Mac Blast. And thanks for the subscription, brother. Or ma'am. Sorry if I messed up on that. Soggy Waffles says, you are someone special to me. Please be with me for... I don't understand that. Either way, salutes for showing up and attending this, this brief video that I'm giving you guys while I'm doing my walk on my treadmill. Because these things, I think about this stuff a lot, man. And I also do a lot of research when it comes to this. I'm hoping that people would do the same and create a dialogue for this, even a community that discusses this type of study. Because there's nobody out there that's discussing this stuff. I mean, all of these years we've been taught to read the Bible and take it literal, but we never had the true meaning of this stuff. That's why we went to places like, or institutions like churches, synagogues, and temples, because these were places where people did extensive studies and were able to decipher the messages behind these scriptures. But it seems like they dropped the ball, because over the years, all we've received is just issues behind following the word. I mean, they've created all types of beliefs behind these scriptures and these literatures that talk about religion. For instance, the discussion about underage and what's appropriate when it comes to dealing with underage people. If you follow the religious scripts, there's a lot of stuff in there that's unmoral, that's considered necessary for the survival of mankind and the beliefs in their God. But if you had a better understanding on which portions of the books that you were reading, and you were able to be put in a situation where you can decipher this stuff, then you would find that most of the stuff that it's talking about when it comes to families and generations in the Bible and stuff like that, and the marriages and shit that they talk about, some of them being underage, some of them being, family members and stuff like Lot and his daughters, and, Mary and Joseph and all that stuff. And you put these stories in the right context, you'll find out that a lot of these stories aren't talking about humans. They're not talking about people. They're talking about a metaphor or some type of persona that these names have behind them and the message that's carried. For instance, when animals are pregnant, especially those that are domesticated, they don't let the animals stay out in the fields when they're pregnant and they're close to conceiving. They want to bring them in to an enclosed environment, in a controlled environment. It's like a barn or a manger or something like that. That's why these stories have significant meaning, because in these environments, they can deliver the animal or the baby without any problems from like predators, the elements and shit like that, and also bacteria, because it's a controlled environment. So I advise you guys to take a look at that description and, read through this rabbi's information. Make your comparisons with your Bible and also with the Torah, and get a better understanding of the context in which these stories are talking about, because I think it's a good read. And if you're not into that, they even got a video version of it on YouTube. Just type in Yeshu, the kosher pig. And I think the gentleman that made that video does a good job of explaining, without really, offending anybody, what the author of that, or the rabbi author of that book, actually meant. So until next time, guys, have a good one. I appreciate you coming out and listening, for walking with your boy. Thank you.